This legislation is an open attack on the immigrant community. This legislation is an open attack on the Asian community. It's an open attack on the Latino community. It's an open attack on any group that's going to be made to fear talking to the police, made to fear cooperating with the police.
They'd have
Let's
to
say they're knowingly, you have a priest who is knowingly transporting somebody that they know doesn't have papers and is taking them to mass. They could be charged under the smuggling statute and get 10 years mandatory minimum jail time. Is that correct?
Well, if you're correct.
So, and there's no mandatory minimum for murder. So can you tell us what the logic is in saying that this offense is worse than murder? Make sure we have a clear understanding of this bill. This bill is not just limited to the border, correct? It has a full statewide impact. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, but you're taking away a judge's power to determine, because normally they can determine how much time that they give to a defendant who's convicted under the statute, right? So why is it that we're taking away the judge's power to determine? Isn't it true, in fact, that the federal government has dissuaded mandatory minimums, correct? Under 20.05 subsection 1 that says a person commits an offense if the person knowingly uses a motor vehicle, and there's another section, so they could technically be charged for driving somebody. A priest could be charged for driving a van load of folks who don't have papers to mass. Is that correct?
We also know that in this chamber, nothing is a coincidence. It is not a coincidence that this bill, SB 4, was filed on October 9th, 3 days after Nick Fuentes came to Texas that Friday. That is not a coincidence. Nick Fuentes comes to Texas and this bill is filed 3 days later. You vote yes on this bill, you vote with Nick Fuentes and against Texas families.
Well, again, what we know with the expansion of this existing statute is not only will we potentially catch up family members, but we may just catch up kids, mules.
The disastrous policy of mandatory minimum sentencing has been rejected up and down the political aisle, including in 2018 under the Trump administration. These are the types of policies that if we blindly enact them, they will lead to grave injustices across the system.
Representative, do you believe that a 13-year-old who gets into a car and drives from point A to point B and knows that there might be somebody in his car undocumented deserves to serve 10 years of his life in prison simply for driving a car from point A to point B with a passenger?
The purpose of this bill is to deter this kind of criminal activity, to deter smuggling. And we believe that by increasing the penalty, by putting a mandatory minimum, that we're going to deter that kind of criminal activity. And so I believe that it's important. I think the majority of Texans believe it's important, and that's what we're doing in this bill.
That the originating legislation, the original smuggling statute, is a statute that is written with very vague language. Would that be fair?
I believe so, yes.
And the language could cover a little, or it can be interpreted to cover a lot of stuff. Would that be fair?
Yes.
So even someone who is just riding in a car, right? If an officer says, oh, we think that they were trying to evade us because they turned left when they should have turned right, that could be interpreted as smuggling, potentially.
It could, yes.
Right?
Appearance of being brown means that you might be subjected to new laws being passed in the state of Texas, correct?
I would point out that...
But we are changing laws that have already existed, correct? You're doing something different, right?
Yeah, we're elevating the penalty.
Okay. Are you aware that in the last hour, a story has broken on Texas Tribune about some of the folks that are trying to push the House and the Senate to pass some of these changes to our laws?
No, I'm not aware.
Are you aware that the Texas Tribune is reporting that leader of anti-immigration group Texans for Strong Borders also runs an anonymous hate-filled social media account, which is again connected to Nick Fuentes?
No.
You weren't aware that a prominent anonymous figure in Nick Fuentes' white supremacist movement is also the leader of Texans for Strong Borders, a well-connected group that has recently emerged as an influential voice of the Texas GOP and pushed lawmakers to crack down on illegal immigration.
Members, please confine your remarks to the amendment before the House.
I'm not sure what this has to do with the bill.
Because your colleague standing next to you, regardless of our partisan divide, has a very legitimate amendment to make sure that relatives of folks are not wrongfully incarcerated under the idea of, quote, smuggling.
So what's the question? I'm sorry.
Are you open to the amendment being offered by your colleague who you know knows how detrimental this will be to many Texans? that the policy does matter, and that if it wasn't going to do something different, you wouldn't be pushing to change the law. So if people weren't going to be affected, you wouldn't be here.
This bill, though, is drafted way too broadly, and it threatens to ensnare Texans who are just living out their everyday lives, attempting to be good friends, family members, compassionate community members, and particularly those who are doing our Lord Jesus would want them to do.
House Bill 4 says that any cop anywhere can skip arrest, skip a judge, skip even booking or a report or any kind of record at all, and just take them to the border and tell them to get out. Again, that includes people who are lawfully here. And when mistakes happen, I guarantee we're going to see even United States citizens forced across the border. I guarantee it. Suddenly, some deputy constable gets to make that call at gunpoint on the side of a road with no process and no paperwork. People lawfully here can be arrested and forced into Mexico. It's not about the immigration process, because this removal process decided by one lone officer at a time. And it's not about the immigration process, because the people wielding this new law like a weapon are above the law. Indemnification for civil and criminal liability makes it clear that we know that civil and human rights will be violated. And that's not only okay, but it is encouraged under this bill. All for that.
And it also authorizes any state or local police officer to enforce those immigration offenses in the bill. Is that correct?
It does, and affords them the opportunity to make a decision on their own, like their judge, jury, and executioner.
At a stop.
At a stop.
Okay.